Hello whisky fans, I'm Ralphie, this is the Whisky Bothy, this is Ralphie Review 1074. Yes, well over 1,000 reviews on this channel, but there again the channel has been going for 16 years, and it was way back in the early days that I first reviewed. In fact, it was in May 2012. So it wasn't too early on in the life of the channel, but retrospectively, you could call that the early days. I bought a bottle of Cragganmore 12-year-old and I reviewed it on the channel. I'd always been a big fan of Cragganmore because it was such an unglamorous single malt. It wasn't up there with the status of Talisker and Lagavulin or even Caol Ila. It was considered a sort of upmarket blend filler malt. But I really enjoyed it because of the character and complexity of it. And this kind of came across in my review number 269, in which I scored this whisky 87 out of 100. A good solid malt mark. But of course, nothing stays the same. Whisky is not consistent. It will always vary slightly, but what we're hoping is in any variances over time, the quality shall be sustained. So when I came back to review Cragganmore again, in review 633, in March 2017, so this is a good 5 years later, I noted that it wasn't quite what it was, but it was still competent. So I gave it 85 out of 100. In this review, I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to tell you the malt mark. In fact, I'm going to show you the malt mark right at the beginning rather than the end, and then I'm going to explain it to you. No, still too high. Here we are. Malt mark 75 out of 100. Usually I leave that right to the end of the video, but here I'm putting it at the beginning because it puts things into context that I'm going to talk about in this review. And I'm going to keep it constructive. I've bought this bottle, by the way. I buy virtually all the bottles I review, so this gives me really a certain privilege, and that is to give an honest opinion without absolutely roasting anything or describing it as garbage and crap, which isn't really very useful to you, and it's just nothing more than a bit clickbaity. So we're not going to do that. What I will say is that in 2021, that was the last time I reviewed Cragganmore, and it was in fact the annual release edition, which was one of the few that was coming out at a reasonable price, because Diageo, the producers of this brand, have a core range of brands. They issue annual releases at cask strength, and their prices can be absolutely extortionate, and therefore they're not worth the money. Because everything has relative value, and I'm sure you agree with me in that. So here we are. Because I don't buy this whisky too often, the differences over the years becomes more pronounced. Now, we're also influenced by the fact that I've got a very experienced palate. I know what I'm looking at. And unlike the old days where I couldn't really articulate what might be wrong with a whisky, I'm in a different position these days. Experience really when it comes to whisky is everything, much more so than having an amazing master blender style of palate and nose sensitivity, because that gives you practical analytics, whereas experience gives you more depth of engagement and connectivity with a spirit, and therefore you can appreciate it in a wider context. But in that review, December 2021, review 908, I gave out 86 out of 100, which was a pretty decent mark for the annual release cask strength edition of Cragganmore. But part of the mission of my channel, and I suspect that will change shortly, is to buy whiskies which my best instincts tell me not to buy. And that for a simple reason that if the availability of Scotch single malt was as extensive around the world as it is in Scotland, there really wouldn't be an issue. But the fact is, Maltmates, that there are many countries around the world, Australia is a very good example, where the availability of quality single malts is really quite restricted, and then restricted further with absurdly, prohibitively expensive price tags. And this is the reality of it. This is why I'm reviewing this. This is a sort of whisky from the largest producer of Scotch single malts and blends, which tends to be available. And I would suggest it's one that you would see in bars in five-star hotels, that doesn't get requested very often because it's sitting adjacent to the Johnnie Walker range. And that's what all the passive consumers tend to go for, because they're not particularly fussed about the quality of smell and taste. So what have we got in this? Initially, you have that very identifiable and very engaging character of Cragganmore. It's a sort of aromatic maltiness. It's got powerful confectionery notes running through it. Cola cubes and a little bit of soft pineapple drops. It has a little touch of rose water about it. It is a sweet malt. It is unpeated, and it's got tons of character. And I'm getting a little hint of that, but not as much as I used to. The nose doesn't cause too many alarm bells to go. It's when I first taste it. Now, before I go any further, to put context into this review, it's the 12-year-old Cragganmore version, which is the standard available one. You do also get a distiller's edition, which is a different coloured label. It is bottled at 40%, which is the bare legal minimum. It is very heavily chill filtered, and I can assure you, see that colour? See the way it's glowing? I'm going to put a piece of paper behind it so you can really see the glow. See that it's almost luminescent in that glow. It looks genuinely like a Jaffa orange fake tan that you get in someone who basically overdoes the cosmetics. This is absolutely loaded with caramel E150A. And the reason they do this is two reasons. So I'll give you both reasons. The first reason is the darker the whiskey, the more flavour it's suggested that it might have. And this is why some companies are constantly using E150A, which is chemically derived colourant. It's artificial. The brand ambassador will say it's natural. No, it's not. When you put your sugar in the sauce bowl on the stove and add water and a little bit of lemon juice and you're making toffee, that's natural. The stuff used here is not natural. It's industrial. And the other reason they use it is to mask the lack of natural colour coming from unproductive and under-influencing casks. It's a very simple reason. First taste. We start off a little sweet and sour. You get a brief glimpse of the Cragganmore signature, and then basically, as soon as you get the beginning of the development after the arrival, it just seems to fade away very, very rapidly. Far shorter than any whisky aged 12 years should be doing. This is an indicator, by the way, of poor quality casks. I'm going to add a drop of water. It's already at 40%. It's struggling to hang on to life here, but I'm just going to add a drop. Boom. Well, I added about 5 drops, ultimately. It won't take long to drown this whisky. It's a shadow of its former glory. What's the reason? I think there's 2 main reasons, and I'm going to give you an opinion here. One reason is the pressure for higher yields. In other words, if you can source a grain variety of barley which gives you more alcohol in the yield, it's going to give you more physical product. But the sacrifice for gaining that yield of alcohol from the carbohydrates in the cereal is the reduction in flavour, because the proteins and other components of the cereal that contribute to the flavour are less prominent. I also think that has been a very meticulous and very heavily engineered manufacturing process to hold on to the bare minimum of the signature whilst losing the personality at the same time. And finally, I think that the casks used are very different from what they even were 10 years ago. I think that Diageo are very heavily invested. In fact, we know this. We know this. In recommissioned casks, replenished, salvaged, recharred, retoasted, and seasoned casks. I'm going to come back to this whisky now, and let's take it forward a little bit, because I'm doing this to make a point here. I've bought this bottle. My channel's about honest reviews, and sometimes it's not good news. But we've got to get the rough with the smooth. We've got to get the bad news to appreciate the value of the good news. Things change. Brands do not stay the same. We all have to deprogram ourselves from marketing propaganda and take control of our own journey, because the result is simple. If we don't, we get fatigued and tired, and then we stop buying whisky altogether. Too many bad buys, and people just throw the towel in, and they go on to rum, or they stop drinking alcohol at all for the sake of their health, because increasingly it's part of the terms and conditions of their health insurance. This is a real thing, by the way, where your health insurance is monitored through social media feedback from the Matrix. Nose. Nose is slightly livelier. It's a little bit more fruity, a little bit more barley sugar, but not much more complex. Taste. Much more of an arrival. It's bigger. It's got that kind of oranges thing going on in it. But then there's this almost artificial sweet note which I've encountered previously in Diageo products, particularly in the Johnnie Walker range, which leaves an almost aspartame sucralose aftertaste. You know, the sort of aftertaste you get from a can of Red Bull or Monster or Coke Zero. Not that I have much to do with those brands. And it's a kind of starts sour, sweet and sour, but then it concludes sour, flat, bitter. And frankly, the finish is not pleasant. The finish is acrid. It is foreshortened. It is compromised. And it's very disappointing. If you're new to whisky and you don't have much experience, this will be acceptable. And the positive takeaway from this review is that if you enjoyed a bottle of Cragganmore in 2025, just wait till you see what substantially better quality whiskies really taste like. And this is the problem I've got. I'm subject to the law of diminishing returns. It's not just the downgrading of the delivery of a brand, in my opinion. It's the fact that my palate has grown much more cynical and intolerant of this these days. I know what good whisky is. I know the taste of good whisky. And the more we're influenced by that experience, the more we can really unravel and deconstruct corporate, homogenized, mass-produced, sanitized experiences which get bottled as single malt whisky. My final thought is this, and I don't mean to depress you, but hey, this will make the positive and glowing reviews, and there's a few in the pipeline the next few weeks, look all the more genuine and better. As I've said, it's always good to have a bad bottle of whisky on your shelf, because nothing shows you what a good whisky tastes like more than having it side by side with a bad whisky. Every time, without fail. But I really feel that the identity, the signature is still there after a fashion. But at this moment in time, so as not to weave too much negativity into my ongoing narrative in this channel, I really don't think I'll ever buy a bottle again in the future. Unless it's from an independent bottler. But then the problem is, so few people have access to that because, no, you're not getting up. Stay away, you greedy bamstick. Excuse me. Yeah, see, I'm filming, aren't you? Righto, there you go. Treats. Every time. These cats have sixth senses. I try and sneak down to the mothy without them hearing me, but it never works. I don't want to bring even more bad news, but I honestly think this brand, along with its brother and sister brands, your Glenelgans, Talisker, classic example. You can still get some good Taliskers, but you've really got to be picky. You've got to be, and you've got to be lucky. And there we have it. I don't want this video to go on too long. I've said all I have to say. But if you want to pop back for Ralphie Review, the Whiskey Bothy, 1074 extras, I'm going to be talking about the law of diminishing returns and how inevitably the experienced whisky drinker is affected by that and what we can do to offset it. See you there.